Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Stephanie Nebehe. I'm the moderator for this high-level dialogue on advancing human rights in the health sector, especially in hotspots worldwide that have been mired in conflict or climate crises, but through the perspective today looking at solutions, including universal health care and economies based on equality, social and economic equality. In the past decade, we've seen the growing impact of conflict on civilians in war zones, from Syria to Yemen to Ethiopia to Sudan, and most recently Haiti. Hospitals and first responders are no longer considered off-limits sanctuaries by many warring parties, although they are clearly protected by international humanitarian law. The deadly airstrikes, some of you may remember, on MSF's Kunduz trauma hospital in Afghanistan was one of the early shocking attacks back in 2015, and very deadly. In what is probably the most egregious ongoing example in the last 6 months, hospitals across Gaza, including Al-Shifa, have been bombed and patients and medical staff killed, while aid convoys with life-saving food and medical supplies are stalled in the face of creeping starvation. And access to health care for the population is one of the first casualties of war. Meanwhile, in areas free of conflict, global warming has exacerbated droughts and floods, hurting health and livelihoods. And these climate emergencies come against the background of increasing poverty and inequality in many parts of the world, which leaves families unprotected. So our event today will be structured around 3 themes, followed by questions to both WHO Director Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus and High Commissioner for Human Rights Volker Turk. These 3 themes are the right to health in conflict and war, the impact of climate crisis on health, and solutions, looking at universal health care and the human rights economy. We'll also have short testimonials by video from campaigners on the ground for each of these 3 themes related to health and human rights. And there is interpretation available. There'll be an opportunity to submit questions by the audience and online viewers through Slido, and you will see a QR code on your screen. So over to Dr. Tedros, who has been at the helm of WHO since 2017, steering it through the COVID pandemic and now through tricky negotiations on the pandemic accord, and to Volker Turk, the top UN human rights official. His 18 months in office have coincided with new wars, stretching his office and the monitors that they deploy worldwide, including in Ukraine. But I believe we're having first a word of welcome from our host, WHO. Is that? Okay.
Okay. Maybe I will say welcome. Huh? No. First of all, apologies for the delay. This is our new building, and we're still learning our technology. It's high-tech, and still not able to tame it. I'm actually fortunate as a WHO DG during my tenure to have a lot of construction. We started constructing this in 2018 and was completed actually 6 months late because of COVID, but on budget. And it's 12 stories. And of course, our old building is under construction. As you know, many of the old buildings are built with asbestos, so everybody has to be evacuated, has to be out of that building. So I'm seeing the construction. I have seen the construction of this, but also the complete renovation of the old one. So I'm really lucky, and would like to welcome all of you and apologize for the problem with the technology. And then the second part is my friend Volker. Thank you so much for joining. This panel should have been done actually a few weeks ago, We couldn't do it because of some problems, but a blessing in disguise. We're doing actually during the right time, because as you know, yesterday was our birthday, WHO's birthday, and this panel will commemorate the 76th anniversary of WHO. And thank you so much for joining us, and very honored to have you. And Stephanie, thank you. I'm very glad to see you with your new job. And with retirement, I think you have changed the tire and started a new chapter. And very glad to have you, and to my colleagues here. And also I see ambassadors and diplomats and my colleagues, and also those who are joining online. Thank you so much for joining. So I think we can start, Stephanie, without further ado. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So the first theme, as we said, was the right to health in conflict and war. So to set the scene, may I ask you each, starting with Dr. Tedros, to describe what impacts on health facilities, health workers, ordinary populations, your organization, WHO, is seeing in today's conflicts.
Thank you, Stephanie. As we know, during conflict, the first casualty is actually health. And as you rightly said, all the three are affected, meaning health facilities, health workforce and care workers, and also the population at large. And when we see, with regard to health facilities, during conflict, deliberate destruction and damage has become the norm now. And not only that, disruptions during conflict is common. And third, the capacity is also overwhelmed. So in health facilities, we see all three. And as Stephanie, you said it, we have seen this in Yemen, we have seen this in Ukraine, we have seen this in Ethiopia, we have seen this in DRC, in Sudan, and almost all conflicts you can name. The problem is actually the trend is increasing. But not only health facilities, with regard to health workers, targeted violence is common, and many are losing their lives. And as you know, the psychological trauma, or also on health workers, which is another big problem. Even colleagues who have been deployed to Gaza, when they tell me their stories, the sleepless nights, and you name it, I don't want to go into details. That's another serious problem. And of course, when you ask health workers, one of the things they say is the limited resources they have, or the access to limited to resources, which is another problem. So many of those I spoke to in many conflicts, they don't complain about their situation, but complain about the lack of resources, so that they cannot be able to save lives. And third, of course, the major focus in conflict is fatalities and injuries in the population, and also displacement and the emergence of many diseases and the health risks that are associated with conflict. So in all three categories, these are the major areas. But in terms of destruction, maybe the health facilities, we have documented last year close to 1,500. And this year, the first 3 months only, up to 300 has been documented. And targeted violence and the risk to our health workforce and care workers, 742 deaths so far. By the way, in conflicts, deaths and injuries of health workers is common. Then, with focus maybe the impact on populations, I just wanted to give two examples when, for instance, where fatalities and injuries are high. For instance, if you see Gaza, more than 70% of casualties are women and children, which is actually enough to stop the war. And the other problem that populations face is displacement. The highest displacement now on earth is the displacement in Sudan, which is 8 million, and that affects the health condition of the people. So conflict, if there is anything that brings, is hell. And I have said it many times, my own experience, and that's why I really hate war, because except distraction, we gain nothing. And I believe many of the problems we face can be addressed politically and can be addressed through a peaceful means. And Stephanie, back to you.
Thank you. Some very stark statistics there which illustrate how widespread the problems are. High Commissioner, would you like to step in on that?
Happy birthday, WHO. I think it's great that we have these anniversaries close by because, as you know, in the WHO Constitution, the right to health is enshrined. It is actually enshrined even before the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was drafted. So I'm very happy to have the engagement with a human rights organization such as the World Health Organization. It's important to bear this in mind. When it comes to the right to health, I think it's important to go back to the origins. I mean, since we talk about anniversaries, and especially after two massive world wars, after atrocity crimes, horrible war crimes, the Holocaust, the Great Depression, I think there was a real recognition that when it comes to health in conflict, that hospitals, medical personnel are sacrosanct, which is why norms were created. First and foremost, the norms within the Universal Human Rights Framework, but also norms then when it comes to rules of war. And there is a special protection when it comes to hospitals, to medical personnel, precisely because the right to health is the most challenged in war times. And it's the one that I don't think there's any other situation where the right to health gets more challenged than in situations of violence, conflict, and war. And that's why there is this special normative system that protects both the infrastructure, but also the personnel, and of course the ones who seek treatment and access to healthcare. And we see, and I fully agree with my friend Tedros, with the Director General of WHO, that the trend of flagrant, blatant disregard for the laws of the war when it comes to hospitals and medical personnel has increased. I remember actually Syria very well, because there we saw this trend that there was almost a deliberate targeting of hospitals and of health personnel. And unfortunately, now Ukraine, over the last, from end of February, the previous 3 months, because of wide area bombardment, we have seen 28 health facilities being destroyed. What's happening in Gaza is an unmitigated disaster, because I think we see hardly any health facilities still working. I think there's about 10 or so that are moderately working or basically not working to the extent that they should. So what does this mean? And I saw it myself. I went to Al-Rish in Egypt near the Rafah border. The type of injuries that you see are horrendous. I mean, the injuries because of bombardment, because of burns, sometimes skins that are no longer there, obliterated over the whole body. I mean, they're just horrible. And of course, you need health care and you need the health response. But what happens if that health response is hardly ever functioning? I mean, you have people who are now being operated on without anesthesia, children operated on without anesthesia, for example. So it's a situation that we can't even describe. And I think we need to really call for action, that we need to regain the space of the normative values that go back to the origins of why it is important to protect healthcare personnel and health infrastructure in all situations around the world. I mean, we are talking about 55 active conflicts, situations of violence. Let's not forget Haiti as well. Haiti is not a conflict as such, but it's essentially akin to it because you have gangs controlling wide parts of not only the capital anymore, but also parts of the country, and as a result, hardly any hospital functioning. And with the type of wounds and the injuries that you see, the mental anguish, all kinds of the fact that you have, of course, also women wanting to give birth, you can imagine what this means when the health facilities are no longer there. And I think there needs to be a wake-up call that the right to health has to be guaranteed through the right to peace. I fully agree with you that we have seen too much talk about wars and military solutions and not enough talk about how to actually regain the right to peace.
Many challenges despite the rules of war and the Geneva Conventions being in place. We're going to shortly have our first of 3 videos, and this is from Sudan, and a testimonial by Shorag Abu Bakr, who is a protection officer with the Mayarim Organization for Women's Development, where she helps victims of sexual violence perpetrated by all sides in the conflict that has displaced 8 million, as was referenced, and left many women and girls vulnerable and needing support, medically and psychologically. So if we can go over to the video, please, the first.
الأشياء اللي عانت منها المرأة في ظل الحروبات، واحدة منها الانتهاكات زي الاعتداءات الجنسية، الاغتصابات، العنف بشتى أنواعه. هي أطراف متنازعة مختلفة، لكن نحن ما بنقدر نتحيز لجزء معين. هي انتهاكات حصلت من كل الاتجاهات والمرأة عانت منها، وفي ظل المعاناة ما لقت رعاية أساسية ولا اهتمام. في جزء من النساء عانوا من حالات نفسية حادة، وفي نساء في جزء منهم مات للأسف. فقدنا نساء في ظل الحروبات، ونتمنى إنه ما نفقد أكتر، لأنه فقد النساء حاجة صعبة وما بتتعوض، لأنه كونك تفقد مرأة بتفقد أمة.
So that testimonial from Sudan, perhaps I'll go first to the High Commissioner then on the video where she's explained about these victims needing medical and psychological support. So, and what kind of, how is your office able to address these issues in war scenarios, and what are some of the longer-term solutions to address this problem?
So when it comes to Sudan, of course, the situation is absolutely horrific, especially when it comes to sexual and gender-based violence. And we have been documenting this for quite some time now, especially by having teams sent to the neighboring countries, being able to take testimonies of women and girls, but also of men and boys, when it comes to sexual violence that is committed by all parties to the conflict in this war, in this absolutely senseless war. And if I can share with you a personal anecdote, when I was in Sudan, it was my first mission as High Commissioner in November 2022, so it was before the war. One of the issues that I raised with both, at the time, de facto President Bur and Hemeti, the Vice President, both who are now heading the warring parties of the conflict, was the issue of sexual violence. And I asked them both to take it very seriously, because there was a bit of a negation of the fact that it would even exist. They said, my troops don't do this. And I said, well, there's no troop in the world, no army in the world where it doesn't happen, so you better make sure that it is actually addressed head on and it's not ignored. And I think I got at the time assurances from both that they would have a zero tolerance policy. Well, we see with this testimony that this is not the case at all. And accountability as a result is extremely important when it comes to this type of crimes. And we need to ensure that that accountability is served. And I hope that, and we have seen also in the investigations by the International Criminal Court, for example, that they look specifically at the use of sexual violence in conflict and war situations. And I really hope that the perpetrators will come to justice. For us, this is one of the most important messages, apart from the obvious one, survivor-centered, both medical services, but also counseling, and the very difficult path of healing and overcoming trauma and dealing with the mental health aspects that such horrific violations always engender.
Important for that message to be transmitted at a high level from your office, and also with the prospect of accountability down the line. The warring parties should be made aware. Dr. Tedros, would you like to comment then about how your office is addressing this widespread gender-based violence in many contexts, and what some of the longer-term solutions might be?
Yeah, thank you. As we all know, gender-based violence is common in conflict areas. And the sad part is, in many conflicts, we see weaponization of sexual violence. And that makes actually the number of victims very, very high, because if it's weaponized, it's systematic, and it's also, deliberate. And from WHO side, as I said earlier, of course, we work on peace and health, because we believe that there is no peace without health, there is no health without peace. But at the same time, of course, while the conflicts are raging, we have to support those who are affected. And we provide support to countries to strengthen their health systems so the victims can get the support they need. And we provide trainings so that there is a skilled workforce that can handle this. But to be honest with you, considering the scale of the problem, I cannot claim that we're addressing a significant part of the problem. It's whatever we're doing or whatever the local facilities are doing compared to the problem is nothing. I can tell you, maybe the sad part is I'm not only a Director General, but who has been affected or who has the first-hand experience of this problem. As you know, during the conflict in Ethiopia, I said it some time ago, in a village where my uncle was killed in cold blood, was an innocent person. It's in conflicts, by the way, innocent people are the victims. Many women, my cousins or third or fourth cousins, were also raped. But the magnitude is so high, maybe you have seen it. Tens of thousands of women were raped in that region during the conflict. And there is no capacity in the region or WHO's capacity to handle it. But you see that not only in Ethiopia, but you see it in DRC, you see it in Haiti, you see it in Sudan, you see it, as our sister said, I'm really sorry for what's happening also in Sudan, you see it everywhere. So maybe my call to the international community is, because of weaponization of sexual violence, the magnitude is so high, so the international community should take it seriously, and there should be a reset in order to address this problem. First, addressing the root cause of the problem, but second, the services that these victims need. It's not just medical services, the psychosocial support, the other support they need as well. But with the growing emergencies now, one of the major challenges we are facing is actually gender-based violence, which is beyond our capacity. I say it, beyond our capacity or beyond the capacities of any player. I know in the conflict which affects me, thousands of women who haven't received any service whatsoever. Nothing, zero. And it's the same in many countries where there is active conflict.
Thank you, Dr. Tedros, for that very transparent assessment, and also adding your personal experience and family experiences in Tigray and Ethiopia, so which must be very painful for you and your family. We're going to be moving to the second thematic sector, and this will be another video queuing up, with the speaker being Elmilker Gabriel Cuetan Cuesta, who is a coordinator at the Indigenous Young Youth of Latin America and Caribbean Network. He'll be speaking about how global warming, climate crisis, is provoking extreme climate effects, including drought in the region, threatening the health and livelihoods of indigenous peoples who are, protecting the biodiversity there. So our second video is ready, please.
Los pueblos indígenas resguardan el 80% de la biodiversidad de nuestro planeta. Sin embargo, en nuestros territorios se atraviesa una problemática que es cada vez más visible, el cambio climático. Los incendios de nuestros páramos, los incendios de nuestros bosques, la sequía de nuestros ríos producida por el aumento de temperatura y los cambios acelerados de temperatura provocan una afectación sobre los sistemas de conocimiento de nuestros pueblos indígenas. Afectan la manera en que se siembra, la manera en que nos relacionamos debido a los desplazamientos que puede ocasionar el cambio climático. Esto finalmente resulta en una afectación en la salud integral de nuestros pueblos indígenas.
Right. So, on our theme of climate emergency, I turned first, I guess, to the High Commissioner on how climate crisis. We've seen how it's natural habitats are shrinking, indigenous people and other local communities are affected. Their resources are vulnerable to exploitation and so forth. Perhaps you could comment on how your office is dealing with the climate crisis in the context of bigger pictures.
Well, one of the unfortunate things of war is that because it's always about crisis management, that it actually doesn't have much room left, political room as well, to actually deal with the big challenges of our time. And of course, the climate crisis is clearly one of them, which means, and for me, climate change and the effects of climate change are a human rights crisis, because it affects, in particular, the right to life. It affects the right to food. It affects the right to health. And we know how much right to food and right to health are actually interlinked, because if you're not able to produce anymore the type of food that you need, you will actually see the consequences when it comes to the right to health. But it also goes to water and the whole water management system. So you see the interlinkages in all its aspects, and it really goes directly to essentially what is a rights issue, because when we talk about rights, it's not something that comes because it's sort of charity, it's because it's an entitlement that people have, and we sometimes forget this. And especially when it comes to climate change, the inequalities and the vulnerabilities that especially marginalized communities face, we need to bring back the justice issue, the equity issue, the equality issue, undoing the inequalities. And I think it was very, very remarkable to actually listen to a representative from the indigenous community, because we have seen members and representatives of the indigenous communities at the forefront of making us aware of the interconnection between all of these rights. They use different language, which is very refreshing, sometimes spiritual language as well, but they actually show us that we live within an ecosystem, that we live within a space that actually brings the different aspects of human rights and health together, including the health of the environment. And finally, the General Assembly in 2022 declared that there is a right to a safe, healthy, and sustainable environment. So environment and health come together also in the recognition of the right to environment. And indigenous communities, environmental defenders, are often at the forefront of making sure that the effects of climate change, that the effects of pollution, that the effects of business practices that are often very damaging to the environment and to the climate, that they are actually brought to the fore and that they are talked about, and that there's even litigation happening as we speak, precisely to bring it back to some of the fundamental rights that are being affected through climate change. And we have been involved in litigation issues, for example, including, by the way, there's one coming out very soon, which was brought forward by Swiss retired women who have lodged a complaint to the European Court of Human Rights, and we expect that this is going to be issued very soon.
Many of those environmental defenders have put themselves at risk, but not through their advocacy.
Through incredible risk. And yes. I think we really need to have special protection measures for them whenever we are present, because Latin America was mentioned. In Colombia, for example, we have done a lot for the protection of human rights defenders, in particular those who defend the environment, and particularly for indigenous populations.
Right. Dr. Tedros, would you like to comment on that interplay, that nexus between the planet's health and human health?
Yeah, no, thank you. I agree with my friend Volker. But one thing on the health side, the climate crisis is a health crisis as well. Actually, the most compelling argument with regard to convincing people on climate change, I think, is health. And some countries are using that, and people are getting it because of climate change. Asthma is on the increase, cardiovascular diseases are on the increase, deaths due to heat waves, especially the population that's affected by heat waves, is on the increase. Vector-borne diseases like malaria, dengue are actually invading places they have never been known before. And they can see it, it's happening. And that's why it's becoming more compelling than talking about global warming or talking about, the ice melting. I think they understand it when it has impact, the communities, when they see that it has impact on their children and their themselves. So I think we need to continue to use the health argument. And I would like to thank UAE actually for the COP28, when for the first time health has a health day, a full day focused on health during a prime day, actually the third day, and also the agreement that was signed, of course, phasing out the fossil fuel. As you know, many people ask why target only fossil fuel, but I mean there is a clear reason to focus on fossil fuel because more than 70% of the contribution to greenhouse emission is actually fossil fuel. The combination of oil, coal, and natural gas, the three contribute on average around 20 to 23%, and in total more than 70% of the contribution actually comes from fossil fuel. That's why that has to be a target, because through air pollution and you name it, and then the climate change, the impact on health is really serious, as we all know. So there is progress now, and I would like actually to thank my colleagues, starting from Maria Neira and her team. They have been working very hard the last few years, and I think people are starting to get it. And we are engaging Azerbaijan, and they would like to give it prominence also during COP29. I think continuing to advocate, promote, and use the compelling arguments of health to let the international community understand the current and then the impact of the climate change now, at the present time, is, I think, important. So we will continue to push. But as Wulkar said, I think when we talk about climate change and the planetary and human health, we shouldn't also forget the loss and biodiversity. I think people can understand that as well, and deforestation, and plus the contribution of the health sector itself to climate change. Meaning the approach should be comprehensive, and it should bring both mitigation and adaptation, by all sectors. And that's what we have seen during the recent COP28. There is a realization that no sector is immune, actually, and whatever contribution they have, focused on mitigation and adaptation, there should be intervention by all sectors.
Yes, that is a compelling argument, our own health, and by mainstreaming that into some of these negotiations, surely that will bring get people's attention. If malaria and other things are turning out to be endemic in areas appearing in areas where they were never endemic before. So we're going to move to our third section on solutions, and a third video that addresses inequalities. And we'll have a testimonial by Aya Duabu, who's a program officer at the Global Initiative for Economic and Social and Cultural Rights. And she has a video with a very chilling account of what happened to a family member of hers in 2018 in Ivory Coast, and the denial of medical care, which is speaks to the need for universal health care and these other solutions. So I think we're ready for the third video, please.
On September 11, 2018, in Ivory Coast, my mother closed from work and went to church. She got into a commercial vehicle that was later involved in a car accident. She had a very bad head injury, a cranial trauma. My brother, who shortly joined the accident location, made sure my mother was taken to a nearby public hospital that was unfortunately unequipped to take care of my mother's head injury. So from there, she was referred to a teaching hospital located 52 kilometers away. The ambulance, the public one, took her there, bypassing another teaching hospital on the way, God knows why. When they got to the destination, the hospital staff said they couldn't attend to my mother because they were overwhelmed. So from there, my mother was taken to a private hospital that requested a collateral deposit in cash of the equivalent of above $1,000. My brother begged. He pleaded with them. They did not listen. Nobody carries around that kind of cash. From there again, my mother was taken to a military hospital located 12 kilometers away. Of course, she died after spending 6 hours with no medical care, in complete suffering. We sought justice, but our justice system did not quite help. The public prosecutor told me unconvincingly that if I want to sue the state through those public hospitals, I may, but I did not receive additional counseling. As for the private hospital, he said there was nothing we can do If a private hospital requests a collateral deposit before saving someone's life, and that is the internal policy, I think victims of systemic medical negligence and their family deserve better in terms of accountability in the health sector.
So, Dr. Tedros, how did that very personal testimony resonate with you, the denial of life-saving medical care, and how does it speak to this need for universal health care, which you're promoting?
No, it's a very sad story, and I'm sorry for your loss, Miss Dobu. But unfortunately, it happens in many places, and it's happening in many places as we speak. And it happens even in high-income countries because of wrong policies, not because of lack of resources. And it happens in poor countries as well. I know actually a friend from many, who died some years ago now. He's from high-income country, and he was diagnosed for cancer. And the family had some saving, but as head of the household, he had to decide either to use the money to be treated, or forego treatment and leave the money for the family and, live peacefully. And I was not surprised. He was a very good man. He chose to forego his own treatment and leave whatever money they have for the family. But to be honest, he shouldn't have chosen between, forego treatment and leaving some money for his family. Very difficult choices. So both bad options, but he had to take the least bad, meaning least bad for him was to protect his family, even if he's going to go. And I know many of you in this room would have the same or similar experience, people who have lost their savings for treatment and as a result impoverished or descend into poverty. And that is not a surprise, because imagine if half of the world's population still doesn't have access to health services. So it's a big size, and you will see the same stories, similar stories in many countries. I don't think many countries are immune. Of course, we have 140 countries who have identified or recognized health as a right in their constitution, which is important, because health should be treated as a fundamental human right, as an end in itself. And at the same time, it's a means to development. So you have both in one. And universal health coverage or health for all, it's a political choice. But whether it's in high income, middle income, or low income country, it's possible. I'm a true believer of universal health coverage because of some of the examples I have seen globally. Of course, the first time I saw universal health coverage in action was in Denmark in 1988. I was there as a student of epidemiology, and I had health insurance for the first time in my life. And I go to a health facility. I pay nothing, just get the service, get the medicine, nothing. And as you know, everything is taken care of using the general tax system in Denmark and the many other countries that follow the same system. And then when I was a student in the UK in 1991 doing my master's, the same through the NHS. That's a different model, and you know it. And UK, for instance, started the Lord Beveridge system of NHS in 1948. And during that time, as you know, it's immediately after the Second World War when its economy was on its knees. So even economy may not be an excuse to start or not. Even in low-income countries, countries can start with the services that they can afford. But many of the things that they can afford. Many of the things that actually can be afforded, except the high-tech medical care, saving mothers, saving children, primary health care free, it can be done. And it's a matter of also the financing models used, and financing models can be used even in low-income countries that can help people avoid financial, hardships. So I believe it's possible, and I believe it has to be a rights issue, an end in itself, as I said earlier, and it should be accepted by countries as a means to development, and it's an investment, and it's not a cost to contain. Because you get both. As a right, an end in itself, you will have healthy society, combined with education, by the way, health and education, then you have a productive society as well. I hope the countries, the 140 countries who recognize health as a human right will implement it fully. And I also hope the remaining countries who haven't recognized health as a rights issue will also recognize health as a rights issue in the Constitution in the future. But I think all the evidence, everything is there to see the benefits of putting health at the center, and countries will commit to realize it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Tedros. I can see why that would be a very memorable event as a young man when you had your first right to some free health care. I can see why that stayed with you.
It influenced me, by the way, as Director General now. I'm a strong believer of UHC, and it's because of Denmark and then what I saw in the UK. Of course, some other time I saw it in Sweden, I saw it in Norway, and started to study it actually since 1988.
Well, perhaps with 140 countries on board, perhaps there'll be some momentum, although, as you say, it's a political choice. But Mr. Turk, would you like to comment then on how you've been championing the idea of human rights economies? Can you walk us through that and how they relate to the video which we just saw about denial of health care?
Well, I think the video, the testimony is really, first of all, horrific and for the person and for the family involved, but it also reveals something which is about the inequalities that we face within societies. And for me, universal health coverage goes beyond politics, actually. It is a rights issue. So for me, even the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, despite the fact that sometimes it's sort of reduced to civil and political rights, has already recognized the right to health in Article 25, because it's a right to adequate standard of living, which includes health. So I think it's, if you like, politics is a little bit constrained by what obligations states themselves have accepted. And I would very strongly argue that universal health coverage is a question of rights, and it has to influence the budgetary decisions that states make, and which brings us to the issue of the human rights economy. But before that, I should also say universal health coverage, if there was any lesson to be learned from the COVID pandemic, it is precisely that. It is that you need to have universal health coverage in order to be able to deal with the big challenges or the stress factors that a pandemic can unleash, for example. So universal health coverage, unfortunately, we have forgotten a little bit the pandemic, maybe not in WHO, but if you look at some of the public discussions these days, there is less of the lessons learned from the pandemic. And we really need to go back to that, because we don't want to be again surprised, and we want to be sure that we're prepared for whatever comes next. And universal health coverage is absolutely critical, both in terms of rights, but also in terms of sustainable development for any country in the world. Human rights economy is a provocation. It's a provocation to all those who decide how the resources are allocated within their budgets. And it's not just at the domestic national level, it's also at the international level. Because of course at the domestic level, we also see some of the fiscal space constraints that governments face, in particular in the developing world, where because of debt repayments, they often don't have the fiscal space necessary to reallocate resources to fundamental rights such as education and healthcare. And as a result, there is also a broader discussion to be had about how international financial institutions are dealing with this type of issues. But it's also at the domestic level. And it's interesting when you actually undertake budget analysis with governments from a human rights perspective, when they look at who is going to benefit from resource allocation, who is going to be excluded, who is going to be marginalized as a result, it gives you a very different prism of a budget analysis. So it actually challenges economists, those who work in treasury or finance ministries, it challenges politics more generally about where the priorities lie. And health is a public good. It's a public good that needs to be provided for through universal health coverage. And as a result, you would want health and universal health coverage to be prioritized within budget decisions that are being made. And not just because it's what may be nice to do, but because it's actually an obligation that you have towards your own population. So it's not a question anymore of discretion, it's a question of obligation. And I think that's what the human rights economy helps us work through, to actually combine. And there was a question in one of the Slidos that, how can we make sure that WHO and the human rights system work more strongly? We actually have a framework of cooperation with WHO. I think we want to have a strategic dialogue between the two organizations precisely to go into much more depth about what the human rights machinery can do to advance the health objectives that you pursue within the World Health Organization. I think it would be good to really tease it out and to use the different arguments precisely for that purpose.
Right. Well, budget allocations, if nothing else, the pandemic should have helped us see the true priorities. I believe we're going to be moving now to the questions, and through Slido. A reminder, there's that QR code there, and we have some of the questions coming in actually from online. We're going to have a first question about, there's negotiations going on in this very room actually for the new pandemic accord. They'll be resuming shortly at the end of April, I believe. So perhaps Dr. Tedros, you could first address some of the potential benefits of the accord, and what maybe help us understand some of the myths that are circulating about that the accord would violate people's rights or impose lockdowns or remove sovereignty from governments. Perhaps you could help set the record straight on that for us, please.
Yeah, thank you. No, thank you. On the pandemic accord, I was also looking at the Slido. One of the questions now coming, I met some member states also earlier today, and one of the common question now is, will this thing happen? Will we have a deal by May 2024? Maybe I will start from that. I believe that it can happen. Because of two reasons. One, there is already progress made in the last 2 years of the negotiation. And second, especially IMB9, I was in the room most of the time and listening to member states' positions. And I think the parties understand the relative positions of everybody. And I felt, that sitting in this room, actually listening, I felt that the next meeting will be a matter of give and take. And they know the relative position, so they will be ready for give and take. I mean, if there is give and take, it can happen. And I know member states now know what to give and what not to give, or where they could be flexible and where it may be very difficult to be flexible. But at least that's what I believe from what I saw and what I heard. And if there is a will, there is a way. And I hope the deal will be made by May 2024. Then coming to what benefits, I think the benefits will be based on what lessons learned from this pandemic. We have faced many, many problems, starting from surveillance, reporting, sharing of tools, and also with regard to financing, governance. And we hope the pandemic agreement will address all these issues. By the way, in the chapters that we have now in the pandemic agreement, starting from prevention, primary prevention, the strengthening the surveillance system, the PABs, the pathogen access and benefit sharing, the increasing the production capacity, technology transfer, everything is there already. So it's a matter of give and take. So what has failed during this pandemic, based on the lessons learned and many of the recommendations, I think the pandemic agreement has already benefited and incorporates all this. So it's a matter of give and take, and the advantage of having this pandemic agreement will be we will not repeat the same mistake, meaning it will be possible to prevent the next pandemic, or if not, we will be able to detect it early and manage it quickly without serious damage like what happened now. And it means the next generation will be safer than we are. And we're the lived community, and we know how it feels. I think if this generation cannot write the pandemic agreement or the pandemic treaty, I don't know who will do that. So it will address the major problems we have faced, and it will prepare us better, and we will not face the same disaster if we have the pandemic agreement or treaty. And then on the myth, you call it, or misinformation on disinformation, as I said earlier, this pandemic agreement is to strengthen surveillance. This pandemic agreement is to share information, to share pathogen samples, and to share tools, and to work together, because this virus doesn't know borders, or any pandemic doesn't know borders, and doesn't need passport to move from one country to the other. So it affects all humanity, and all of us, all humanity is on one side and the virus on the other. So this is what is in the agreement. But what is not in the agreement is what is flying as a misinformation. WHO is not going to cede any country's sovereignty. And I don't need to explain much on this. The member states themselves have been really concerned about this claim. And in the pandemic agreement or treaty that's being negotiated, one of the articles, Article 24, is actually on this same issue. It refutes the claim, says the WHO Secretariat or its Director General will not dictate any country, and whatever we agree here will be implemented based on the national law. So to those who have doubts, The only thing I would like to say is just go and read the text and check Article 24, which clearly says it will not give any powers to WHO to take any country's sovereignty. Meaning, like some are fearing, WHO will not have the power to impose lockdowns or to impose mask mandates. It will be up to the countries based on their risk assessment that they will decide what measures to take. Of course, WHO will advise, will guide, but it will not intrude into countries and cede their sovereignty. I think that has to be clear. Initially, with my colleagues, we used to laugh. What's silly? People are saying this. This is really silly, and we were laughing. But it's no longer a laughing matter. It's actually dangerous. What's spreading is dangerous. It's very dangerous, and we have to all fight it. And it's not true. And I think the global citizens should know that, should know the truth, and we will continue. But not only the Article 24, where we have many member states in the room, I think you should also tell your side of the story. This agreement is being negotiated between member states, and will be implemented by you without anybody's whatever influence based on your national laws. And I think your voice will also help us in pushing back on the misinformation and disinformation that's circulating. But I am hopeful that we will have a deal, and I am hopeful that the member states will conclude the deal on time, so we will not face the same problem and tragedy that has taken the whole world actually a hostage. Thank you. Stephanie, back to you.
Thank you. Well, hopefully your message is heard about give and take in the next period of informals and then the resumption of negotiations ahead of the Assembly. And that Article 24 language sounds very explicit about defining WHO's roles and what it's not able to do for any doubters. So then I think we still have to hear from Mr. Turk on the potential pandemic accord and from a human rights lens, through a human rights lens.
Yeah, and I see that there are a number of questions actually on this very issue. First of all, I would like to pay tribute to WHO for an amazing job that you have all been doing during the pandemic. I saw it firsthand from where I was at the time in the Secretary General's office, and I really admired the perseverance, the incredible hard work, the energy, the dynamism that you have all put in order to help us manage this, help the world manage this pandemic. And I think there are indeed a lot of lessons to be learned from it. And I hope that the pandemic accord will see the light of day. It's absolutely critical that if we look even at intergenerational justice issues, that we that we are really capturing the lessons learned from this pandemic, so that we are able to be much better prepared in the future, also for children and for young people today who may face yet another pandemic, not least because of climate change and biodiversity loss and so forth. Look, I admire also, I have huge appreciation for those who negotiated this pandemic treaty. And I can only imagine how difficult it is to look at the different dynamics within it. I have no doubt about that. It is also true, though, and you have seen probably especially the member states have seen my open letter, that I wish that human rights would feature more prominently in the pandemic accord, because we all know that, and we have just been discussing it, right to health is a fundamental human right. We have also seen during the pandemic the human rights implications of it, because they go beyond the immediate health response. We know how it influences socioeconomic inequalities. We know that there are structural barriers to access to healthcare. In some instances, there are issues of emergency measures that may not be necessary, proportionate, time-bound, and so forth. So there are a lot of human rights implications that go beyond immediately the health response. And I think it would be good to think through, at least to make sure that the human rights component, that there is a very clear interlinkage there, and that it's woven into the pandemic accord. And I think we need to make sure that we understand whenever there is any measure, be it preparedness, be it prevention, what is the human rights impact? How does it affect different segments of a population? Are they involved? Is there a participation? How do we actually learn? And also, what are the equity issues around access to treatment, vaccines, and so forth? So there are human rights implications in all of this, and it's important to make sure that they are flagged throughout that treaty to make that interlinkage so much closer between, if you like, the human rights mechanisms and the health work that needs to be carried out.
Thank you. Thank you. I think we have a few minutes left, so we'll move to the questions that have been submitted. The first one has been submitted and says, how can WHO empower the voice of LDCs and lower middle income countries for access to medicines, given what the questioner says is the inherent power imbalance in the international system, which acts as an obstacle to that access? Dr. Tedros?
Yeah, I think two things we're pushing on this. One, it's the local production. And we have an mRNA hub technology transfer in South Africa and a training hub also in Korea. And 15 countries are members of this initiative now. And there, of course, mRNA not only for COVID, that technology can be used for many other diseases. So I think that will be important, and it's being positioned very well also in the pandemic agreement itself. So that I hope will address. And the second is the governance of the financing institutions that many of the low-income countries, LDC and LMIC, are raising, which we support, because supporting in the preparedness of pandemics is not a charity. It's solidarity. The high-income countries contribute through these financing institutions, not just for the sake of the low-income countries, but it's for their own sake. Because everybody is protected when we protect the weakest link, because we are as strong as the weakest link. So if we believe that this is not charity and solidarity, so the governance in these financing institutions should also ensure ownership by the low and middle income countries as well. So I think these are a couple of issues we're pushing among others, but based on the preparedness architecture now we have prepared, there are many other initiatives that will address this problem, and it's a very important one. And Volker had already said it. There is one thing at the center of the COVID pandemic problem is equity. And there is already agreement by all member states that operationalizing equity using international law has to be at the center. That's very important. So it's an equity issue. So that I think frame will address this question. Thank you.
And the technology transfers, as you mentioned. Mr. Turk, do you want to comment on that, or would you rather jump ahead?
No, I just want to comment as well, because I fully agree. And for me, it's also linked to the human rights economy, because it looks at inequity issues within the international system, precisely because you want to ensure that LDCs, seeds, for example, are much better protected and can actually afford the type of investments that they need to make. By the way, we are seeing now in Southern Africa, Mozambique, Zimbabwe, Zambia, a cholera outbreak, which is quite significant. And it shows, if you look at, for instance, Zambia had to go through a very difficult process on the financial side. If you then see what it then brings in terms of lack of investments because of austerity measures that can't be made, it shows the link between a human rights economy and how it affects the right to health, because you see then an outbreak of cholera, for example.
Right. So the next question has to do with what seems parallel tracks dealing with health and human rights by OHCHR and WHO. Although complementary, the question is they've been detached and parallel. So can you perhaps just sketch out a few of the areas of the next steps in mutual cooperation?
Well, what I would suggest, Tedros, if you agree, that we actually have a strategic dialogue, both organizations, WHO, OHCHR, that we sit together and work through these different issues and actually, we can use the framework of cooperation, bring it to the next level. We couldn't do it during the pandemic, but I think it would be good to take stock, look strategically how both worlds can be much closer together on a number of fronts. And I think, we can plan for it sometime this year. I think we need to prepare it, obviously, but it would be good to do it and to be shoulder to shoulder in this.
No, I fully agree with the strategic dialogue, and based on that, we can renew our MOU, which we have signed some years ago. Identify, based on the changing, actually, global situation, identify areas of cooperation and work together. But there is a strong commitment to work together. It was the first time, actually, we signed an MOU a few years ago, and this shows the commitment to continue on the same track. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. I think we're up against time. It's just about 2. Do we have time for some closing remarks by either of our speakers? Perhaps, was there any sort of take-home message you want to send to the audience briefly? Because I think we're just up against the 2 o'clock time limit. Yes?
I can quickly say something. It's, if anything, but this discussion has proven, is that you actually need to make sure that both worlds are a seamless transition, and they are. Human rights and health, because health and human rights is one and the same. They are, of course, the mechanisms are then different, because you have the human rights mechanisms, we have the different treaty bodies. I saw in some of the comments from the Slidos and some of the questions, CRC, the Convention on the Rights of the Child, was mentioned. So it's good to work through all of these, but it's a seamless working together that is needed in order to be upfront on making sure that the right to health is realized and that it's properly understood, especially by the political class and the economic class.
Dr. Tedros, for the final.
No, thank you. I fully concur with that, and to add my one, it's seamless. I fully agree. Then the couple of points I would like to add is we started with our discussion on conflict, and the past. This is since 2019. We lost 2 of our colleagues in conflict, actually. The first one was during Ebola outbreak in North Kivu. More than 18 armed groups actually operate in that region in North Kivu, DRC. And our late colleague, Dr. Richard Muzoko, was killed in cold blood by the armed groups, by the way. And the second one is Dima al-Hajj from Gaza, just end of last year. I just wanted to remember our two colleagues who lost their lives in conflict, because yesterday was our World Health Day, and remembering their contribution and their sacrifice. And then, of course, the key now is the pandemic agreement or pandemic treaty. So we hope we will conclude member states will conclude that agreement. And I would like to remind that we keep the momentum. And I'm glad we have many member states today, and they will make a deal. And I'm very confident that will happen. So these are the two things I would like to add. But not only those late colleagues, but I would like to thank my colleagues for their hard work. I think Volker had already said, especially when we were passing the whole world, actually through the turbulent weather. We're in a better situation now. But if I didn't have a great team that's hardworking, working in good faith, I think we would have been in trouble. But we normally take for granted what we have, the precious things we have at hand. But it's such a great honor, actually, to work with my colleagues. And I would also like to use this opportunity, especially to thank the General, Mike Ryan, the soldier, and congratulate him, because now he's our Deputy Director General, and for all his sacrifice, and his team, and all WHO staff at large, by the way, for all the hard work, because it's our World Health Day, and would like to pay tribute and to say thank you so much, since Thanksgiving is the song of the heart. So thank you so much, and I'm honored and privileged to work for WHO. And thank you, Volker, for joining us and to be with us during this important day. Thank you. Vielen Dank.
Thank you.
Her asthma, it's getting worse.
We can't help you here.
We can't help you now.
Come back next week.
Can someone please tell me what's going on? You must pay cash to be admitted.